allowing them to get like more bodily autonomy. We have rights for them to not get harassed. We have rights. We have those kind of rights, so on and so forth. All right, moving on to my substantives as to why exactly is that prioritizing this, we get to achieve our goals faster. 2 prongs to this. First prong is that we get more immediate and tangible results. Why is this? Why is this true? This is because when we prioritize these people that from these well-off communities, they are more willing to push for change due to the nature of them being progressive in the first place. They are more willing to buy into these movements and changes, but also they are more like these are also the people that are more likely to continue pushing for these things because it already aligns with what they believe in, and it allows for these changes to happen. Having these people of like higher status and all, it also helps elevate and like helps push for these things to be passed in parliament faster due to the nature of them being able to have these connections and like having the ability to push for these things to be put in parliament in the first place. Second prong to this is that the financial needy are harder to persuade. Why is this true? Because even like in the motion that we can see that these people already adhere to more traditional roles. So one, buy-in on their side is like a lot harder already in the first place. But also this is due to them being like more sheltered and buying into more traditional beliefs. This also looks like people like buying into more accepting that men do work, women just stay at home, and like they also like quietly shelter things like getting abuse and all because they feel like that's part of like some tax they have to pay for like having a man to like provide for them. So the reason why we prioritize like well-off people is that firstly, as I said before, they have the skills and tools to verbalize and understand issues that come up. Secondly, as stated before, they have the professional connections to ensure that these things get through faster as compared to like having prioritize like people from these needy areas. Thirdly, they have the financial resources to like go through it. And 4, they are more perceptive to like these feminist issues and ideals. So what are the impacts of this argument? Firstly, we see that in a larger magnitude, it would allow these policies to be passed through a lot faster. This is so that we can see, this is because we have more people in power, more people that are well placed and well positioned to push for these things to happen. So the likelihood of these policies happening is like even higher, but the likelihood of it happening even faster is also even higher. Second impact is that there will obviously be a trickle-down effect, because as we stated before, we are not neglecting the needs of like we are not only prioritizing the well-off people and like leaving the needy people to fend for themselves. We're also catering them into this. So even if they don't buy into the idea, even if they don't like believe that and all this kind of stuff, they will still like feel the benefits at the end of the day. So even if like they don't understand and they don't enjoy this change, at the end of the day, we have like better communities and safer places for women in general. And like by having the well-off communities push for these policies, it ends up being a lot better. So let's weigh this out. For example, so on a likelihood analysis, which side is able to like achieve like better change? So when you have, as I said before, when you have well-off communities that are like pushing for these people are like more knowledgeable and more understanding of these issues, they will be able to like one, verbalize it better in a way that a lot more people can understand it, and 2, would be the people that would be most likely to get these policies not only passed, but it passed a lot faster as compared to these communities, as compared to when we don't prioritize them, when we try to include everyone like in discussion in the push. Because when you include everyone, there is the bigger challenge of getting people to buy in first, which is a burden that side opposition needs to prove to us as to why having them buy in is like key, is like essential to like getting these policies passed in the first place. We also showed you how on our side, we don't really, on our side, it's also more sustainable because we have people that are of mind and believe in these things and would be the ones that will be championing and pushing for these policies to fight for these women and fight for women as a whole. So, ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up my speech, if you really, to cater to all women as a whole, pass the motion. With that, I've been proud to propose.
All right, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Up next, I would like to invite the Leader of Opposition, Mr. Rashtin, to present your arguments. Please welcome. Rashtin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, just making sure I'm visible and audible. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I don't understand what is this connection that side government want to propose. How is it that this connection is going to make national amendment and constitution changes? It is extremely idealistic and utopian world to believe to begin with. Two responses to case that government has proposed. Number one, they claim that these progressive movements have better connection to bring legislative changes in parliament. I have three responses to this. Number one, judge, you need to acknowledge in the absence of feminist movement intervention, the organic process of change can already take place in this progressive world because they have more political capital and more lobbying power. Number two, the proposal that they make is extremely idealistic. There's no proper mechanism to show, number one, who are this connection. Number two, why is it likely for them to able to attain these changes in the very first place? Notice if there's one feminist in the parliament who wants to propose it and 100 other conservative individuals or male who just reject the policy, it is not going to be passed. But number three, then judge, even if you were to pass, it can be just revoked in the blink of an eye. Look at instances of Roe v. Wade in the US, where it's being repealed after years of fighting again, majority of changes. But lastly, then, even if they want to achieve this, judge, notice that it takes such a long time, generation of changes. At this instance, the feminist movement is losing out because they're burning capital and money, fighting against groups of lobbyists within the parliament group with an uncertainty of outcome, whether they can pass or not. Second response, then, notice how they claim the elitist part in this speech. A lot of the argument are premised on the idea that privileged women are smarter or the better face of the woman. Number one, I think it's extremely discriminatory to say that women who are conservative are not good enough to make changes. But number two, then judge, this also ignores the so-called stupid women who they claim want to help from the whole portion itself, because these are the women who are the most vulnerable actors we should be defending this debate. Let's begin with framing. Number one, I think it's sufficiently dealt with to talk about who are these feminist organizations. But number two, just more importantly, what are these feminist values? I think government does a very lazy job to just show what they want. But notice, judge, particularly in this debate, there's a spectrum of values that feminist organization embodies. It is important for us to remember that they're not a group of monolithic individuals. Notice how Western bias has feminist values to be always liberal and to an extreme spectrum, talk things like slut walk, full sexual liberation, girl boss feminism. But these instances are not particularly true. They are also less liberal group who argue for changes that are more proximate to them. This looks like arguing for safer workspace, protection from domestic abuse that they have to go through, because these are the common values happening most proximate to them and also commonly right to their face. Second piece of framing, then, what does these conservative areas look like? I think there are three important parts we can explain. Number one, there's going to be a strong gender adherence, meaning people are going to follow the biologically assigned gender that they have. But number two, then, judge, they are oftentimes tied to strong religion dogmas. Then they're expected to follow this kind of teaching themselves. But number three, then, Dutch, that lacks a huge amount of safety net for women to begin with. Number one, this looks like rampant with domestic violences, where women have to depend oftentimes from their partner for support. But number two, Judge, there's no support for women that work and they're able to take care of the children at the same time. This is because of detrimental patriarchal structures that emphasizes women's role to stay at home without negotiation to switch roles with their partner. And number two, then, family values that tell women that they should stay at home, and things like your mother-in-law, your mother himself, embody these kind of values within you. Third piece of framing, then, what does prioritization actually look like in our world? Number one, we're going to try to relocate this money to more conservative areas. Number three, campaigning efforts and grassroots movements are going to be focused upon these conservative areas. And number three, then, the branding of our message accordingly. And this is particularly important, Judge. We are going to fight for things like safety nets for women, more education programs to encourage them to join the workforce, try to import feminist value to these conservative ideas. This also looks like setting up more shelters for women to be safe and escape this kind of domestic abuse that's happening in their house. With that done, let's go to the argument right away. First argument, Judge, is the principle of intersectionality. What is this? What does this mean actually? It's the understanding within a minority group of people where they have different background. It could be in terms of their group, it could be their race, it could be their income earning as well. But what does this then warrant prioritization? No, Judge. Firstly, groups that are exposed to these kind of conservative areas experience the most amount of harm. Notice how in these conservative areas, feminist movements are oftentimes weak. These are for three reasons. Number one, they lack less political capital to fund the movement, to do things like campaign or work setting up office. Number two, there's no structural organization to properly plan the movement and spread it to a larger space. But number three, then, Dutch, people are also oftentimes demographically fragmented, and there's very less ability for them to collectivize and structure a movement. This is why the harm that women go through are oftentimes amplified in terms of abuse, discrimination, and oppression. Second reason, then, is the social welfare assistance given to these women are oftentimes poor. This looks like lack of affirmative actions. This looks like lack of favorable policies. Also, then, patriarchal structures that are overworking within the community. This premise itself proves to you why there's an urgency of necessity of intervention by the feminist movement more within this kind of conservative areas compared to progressive movement. What is the comparative then? Notice how in their world, women within privileged context will always fare out better. And number two, the moral obligation of feminist movement should be prioritized towards these people. Even if Gov were to claim we need to make the glass ceiling for trickle-down changes to happen, it is unlikely going to happen for two reasons. Number one, breaking glass ceiling policies glass ceiling movements does not automatically come with equitable policies, because you can't do it with just one woman who stands out within the community. You need a whole group of women to come together and make these kind of changes. In order to break, it is oftentimes people who are going to be most closest to the ceiling. means they're somewhat already better off. And notice that at the end outcome of this is women who eventually become the ruling class people oftentimes forget the ones that are most vulnerable because they already attain what they want in the progressive classes group that they want. But number two, and more importantly, Judge, it just takes too much time and money. Things like amending the constitution, passing national policies, changing patriarchal structures oftentimes takes time in terms of generations to evolve. This at this point, notice there is a direct harm that leaves the oppressed woman to continue suffering for a longer period of time. In opposition's world, there's an immediate intervention to provide for relief because these are things that are more attainable and easily taken about. The comparative in off is clear than that. Number one, since there's more direct given to them, it is going to be faster. We're able to maximize the resource and automatically have the most vulnerable. POI before 6.
So on your side, you tell us that you're telling us we're running like a very ideal case. However, on your side, are we supposed to magically believe that all these conservative people would buy in to your idea in the first place?
Here my second argument. Why these conservative communities will oftentimes be receptive to feminist organization then. Notice the mechanism to ensure they are receptive is tailored to measure in the right way itself. This looks like number one, religious institution, where in Islam, Nabi's daughter Aisha was told to educate fight in war itself. Or in Malaysian communities like sisters in Islam. But number two then, conservative gender roles. Things like respect your mother, respect your sister, or be a chivalrous gentleman. All these kind of things are particularly tailored suited towards a need. Notice, Judge, that these are areas that are financially needy, as well as women probably need these shelters education programs. There are solutions feminist women are particularly able to provide and attain with. But number two, then, why is this mechanism likely going to exist? Number one, there's already a progressive trend recognized which recognizes feminist movement to be inclusive and not alienate them from other groups. But number two, Judge, there's also things like cancel culture that oftentimes occurring. It means you're able to hold accountable feminist women who are going beyond the line, which are not aligned with your own values. But number three, then, we have also have a precedence of standards that are being reverted in the past. Things like when the Western feminist women say hijab is a shackle, but now they understand and they retract those kind of statement and say we understand Muslim women need to wear hijab for themselves. Why is this an important, Judge? Number one, notice the huge influx of political capital. You are able to assist this woman to push for more policy changes. Number two, you're able to revive feminist movement and give them a starting point. This looks like helping them to start up with campaign, working spaces, covering their logistic expenses to solve the fragmentation problem happening within the space. But second important stat is the urgency of intervention. At the point which women groups are constantly left to be suffering and oppressed by the community, that's a net harm that GAF definitely has to defend. So proud to oppose.
All right, sorry for interrupting. Opposition team, UM, can you hear me? Hello, UM, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Some of you guys are using blue backdrop. It's for government. Please change to red backdrop here. Also, opposition whip, please open your camera. I would like to remind once again, this meeting is being live broadcasted here. Thank you. Now, I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister from the government team, Mr. Ryan Iskandar, to continue proposing the motion. Please welcome.
Hello, am I audible? Can you hear me? So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the opposition side is actually saying that what the cases is coming from the government side is actually idealistic, and at the end of the day, it won't work out, right? But the thing is that the LO actually dropped a ton of cases that were also idealistic here. So what are the differences of the cases that the opposition side that claims that their side is better in terms of executing, protecting women, financially protecting women as a whole, right? The thing is that the entire case is also stated out idealistic here. As what my PM has already asked before, is that how do they actually ensure that women from these financially needy communities will immediately accept this ideology stated out, or the amount of investment that are being spent on these financially needy communities here in order to accept and in order to protect them from the dangers that they are facing right now here. 3 things that I'll be doing in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to give some rebuttals about how LO's case won't stand at the end of the day in terms of long term. Secondly, I'm going to clarify again what has been set out by my Prime Minister, and thirdly, I'm going to give out 2 premises on how our side actually benefits the most in terms of protecting women here. So firstly, in terms of rebuttals here, in how the LO actually gave an idealistic view and a speculative view on how, if they actually allocate money towards these conservative areas, right, immediately they will have change immediately, and at the end of the day, women can be protected here. This is actually false, ladies and gentlemen, because number one, even if you give a lot of money, even though you supply a lot of funds towards these conservative areas, right? The thing is that you have to consider is that their social status here, their environment of living here, how would they actually accept the fact that by government actually giving them incentives to change their lifestyles, right? How do you actually ensure that at the end of the day, they will actually accept the fact that they have to change? And you also need to consider on how the safety of the woman in this financially needed areas here, what will actually happen to them here. And you also claim that it takes too much time if they follow our side. It takes too much time in government's world if you want to actually prioritize these progressive movements first in order to change how feminist movements are, right? Ladies and gentlemen here. The same thing also happens in opposition side here. It also takes a lot of time. They also need to consider, as I said before, they also need to consider that even if you give a lot of money, if you invest a lot in these financially needed areas, right, you also need to consider on how they will be actually accepting this, how would they actually be accepting this view, this movements that actually are spread out by forcing them, ladies and gentlemen here. All right. Again, I would like to re-clarify that no, we are not neglecting the voices of the people, of the women in financially needy areas here. We are actually involving them in discussions here. We can actually use them as an example to show the world what is actually happening towards females in conservative areas here. But what we mean by this is that we are not totally neglecting them. Remember that we are totally not neglecting them. But the thing is that why we believe that progressive feminist movements should be prioritized is that they should be the ones who are actually executing they should actually be the one who are executing the progress itself here. Number one, before I go any further, I would like to clarify again, what is the meaning of progressive communities, progressive feminist movements here? Number one, progressive feminist movements are a community in well-influenced people, financially stable people, educated, and also people that have resources in order for them to preach out their ideas, in order for them to actually show the world what is actually happening here, and they have resources to actually advocate for justice between both genders, between all genders here, ladies and gentlemen here. And number two, why is it important that we actually prioritize progressive feminist movement is that they can actually take action in terms of protecting female individuals more seriously and more effectively here. Why does this actually clash out with what the opposition side is saying, that we should actually invest immediately towards the conservative areas, right? Number one, the differences is that if we actually, number one, in terms of if we actually want to provide, I'm sorry, moving on. Number one, on our side here, we actually want to promote more social diversity here. What I mean by social diversity is that these people progressive feminist movements, right? If they are being prioritized, right, they actually have a clear view and they will make the feminist movements more visible. They will actually show the world how these feminist movements actually look like here. Yeah. And therefore, it promotes cultural diversity more rapidly, and also it benefits the long-term effects here. So progressive movements have feminists, as what both of us have said before, progressive feminist movements that have females who are in the industrial sector, who are in the parliament, who are, even though they won't be listened, right? But the thing is that they will still be fighting for what they want to preach, what they want at the end of the day in terms of long-term benefit here. And to answer the fact that even though Roe v. Wade has been has been passed in the United States, right? But the thing is that even until now, even if it's passed, people are still advocating for it. People are still fighting for it here. So that means that progressive movements here actually have the change, actually have the execution here in order for them to change the female life in minority communities here. They also have influence with policymakers here, people who are feminists who are in the industrial sectors who can actually change policies here. And at the end of the day, it leads to long-term sustainability. So ladies and gentlemen, why is this true? Number one, it causes the spread of feminist ideologies that are actually true here. And yes, opposition might argue about, even if we take these policies, right, then females will actually forget who are the more superior, and they will feel more superior here. The thing is that, no, thank you. But the thing is that you have to actually understand here, these policies, whenever they're implemented, they will actually change towards time. They will actually have to adapt to the current situations that are actually happening in the world right now. When the progressive movements actually promote these diversities, right, then the communities, as what my PM has already stated before, there will be a trickle effect in where the minority communities will actually start to follow here. And at the end of the day, it leads to long-term stability here, in where the feminist movements, in females in minority communities can actually live a peaceful life here. So why is this impactful?
as what I said before, it starts at the top of the chain towards the bottom of the chain. And at the end of the day, what does this actually lead to? Long-term impact, where communities from financially needy communities, right? They will actually understand the fact that, oh yes, because feminist movements from the top of the chain are actually advocating for my peace, so I have to also follow here. They are not being forced. Yes, they will have a ton of shit that they actually have to live with, such as they have to take care of a lot of kids, they have to take care of themselves from them being abused mentally from their partners, right? Again, because of this, because of the governments are actually forcing this ideology towards them, they actually feel like it's okay, I'm better off living in my current situation right now here. Whereas in our world, we are actually promoting a change here, which is not currently forcing them here. And what at the end of the day, what does this actually cause here? We are not neglecting the fact that minority communities, females in minority communities actually exist here. But it's important for us to also tackle the issue from the top of itself, to promote feminism from the roots itself. This is why we from the government side actually believe that it is important to prioritize female feminist movements from the top, because they already have the resources, and at the end of the day, it leads to a more long-term sustainability. With that, I have a brother to oppose.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister. Up next, I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Ms. Catherine, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Just checking, can I be heard? Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, they can't accuse us of not making things out when their literal mechanism for trickle-down effect is that, guys, we get trickle-down effect. No solvency, no change on their side. 2 parts to my speech. First, a few miscellaneous responses. Then secondly, I'll prove what type of change the feminism movement can create in these conservative areas and why this is more important than all the best case arguments that we get from side government. The first on responses. Firstly, I want to point out it's really not fair for them to accuse us of not approving how conservative areas can be receptive to the feminism movement as a whole, when Rashfin literally spent 2 minutes of his speech proving this already. The fact that they don't have any response to this means that you have to be more punitive to them because they're not listening to the case from the leader of opposition. What did Rashfin tell you? Number one, we can tailor our message accordingly. We don't need to come in with such strong liberal values that literally alienate everyone in these conservative areas. We proved how the feminism organization as a whole is a spectrum of values. We can choose the ones that are most tailored towards these areas. But secondly as well, these areas are financially needy. I really don't see any reason as to why people wouldn't welcome the help that the feminism organization can do in these areas in terms of shelters, soup kitchen, donation drives to these women that are vulnerable and needy. We think these are things that are intuitively very going to be accepted by these people in these areas. But secondly as well, governments just prove that these people have money and thus they have the ability to create any form of change, regardless of whether they can create legislative change or not. I think they need to prove firstly why these people in privileged areas are likely willing to attach themselves to the feminist movement, when firstly they're likely to have more proximate issues to them, like making laws that protect the rich, like tax breaks, etc., or business subsidies, things that protect them and their businesses more. But this is secondly, I'd argue that these people probably don't want to attach themselves to a cause that is deemed too much of a deviation from the norm. I don't see any reason as to why these people the government has a fiat to prove that these people would want to attach themselves to the feminist movement. I think it's a bit too late for them to prove that already. But thirdly as well, in terms of the second argument from the Deputy Prime Minister on social diversity, I really didn't know that the feminism movement was in concern with culture in any form or way, but we'll prove to you why we get more representative feminism on our side. But first note, panel, before I move on to my argumentation, there's really no response to Rashfin's debate-winning principle on obligation. We've proven why women in these conservative areas are more needy in terms of getting safety net structures, help, just direct aid from the feminism movement, why they deserve this help, and why it is justified to prioritize our efforts into these areas. This already won us the debate from the first speech. Moving on to my argument. What type of change can the feminism movement create in conservative areas? We think there's 3 forms of changes. Firstly, in terms of direct help, I think intuitively the feminist movement can create tangible change or short-term change in these areas that prioritize or plug the gaps of society that is lacking for women in terms of shelters and soup kitchens and education programs that teach these women technical skills that gives them some form of employment in some way. We think there's ability for the feminist movement to create sustainable change in these areas for a sector of of the community that desperately needs it. But also secondly, we think the feminism organization can create a countervailing force to the patriarchal narratives that exist in these areas. And this is important because we create a safe space for women in these conservative areas. This safe space is important for two reasons. Number one, it affirms them and gives women in these conservative areas a place to be themselves rather than just a mother to a son or a wife to a husband. It allows them to be people. But secondly, it's also representative as well. Note that every form of feminism that comes out from side government is going to be dominated by privileged women that do not necessarily understand the struggles of women on the ground. I'll prove this more later on in my speech. We think it's extremely important then to also note that the feminism movement can also create forms of long-term change in these areas. This was a mindset change where you argue, or at least you prove to these people that women are valuable parts of the society, that you can educate them, that you can give them jobs, that they are able to affect some form of change to their families in terms of income, in terms of just being people themselves. We think we also are able to show people in these conservative areas that the feminism movement is not just a Western agenda, but it is a ground roots movement that is able to help people on the ground. Why do we think this is important? A few reasons. Firstly, I think these areas suffer from a chronic lack of attention from the government, like they're likely to focus on other areas like the economy or just businesses in general, thus lacking or at least neglecting the women in these areas. We think the feminism movement then has an obligation to step in and have proven why they're able to help the women in these areas. But secondly, there's a lack of a countervailing force in these areas. Don't let proposition dismiss the importance of just affirming that these women are actual people, that they have rights, and that they should be able to live a life that is not one of subsistence. But thirdly as well, we think we have great faster change as compared to legislative change. Note that their mechanism of trickle-down change is extremely ambiguous on their side, and I don't know how this actually trickles down to people. But lastly as well, we think this creates a better image for the feminism movement in terms of actually doing things instead of just like walking the talk, instead of just talking. Before 6, I'll take a POI.
No, sorry, I was indicating that we can't hear you just now for the last 10 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yeah, what type of change then can the feminism movement affect in these progressive areas? We think firstly, these areas are dominated by privileged women. We think this is likely to be unrepresentative on the side of government because they don't understand how the struggles of women are in these areas. Government just asserts that these women are able to understand the struggles of poorer women. I don't think this is necessarily true. They're probably already born in privilege, but so secondly, they're likely to fight for things that are more proximate to them, like women in management roles, rather than actually having more legislative laws that tackle domestic abuse. But secondly, it requires trickle down. This is where I'm going to attack on their lack of mechanization, because all of their argumentation of legislative change, firstly, doesn't necessarily trickle down, but this is secondly, in the best case possible, it takes an extremely long time. This process looks like having discussions, garnering political will, buying over politicians, waiting for it to be passed in parliament, then parliament passes and enforces the law, and then you wait for the enforcement to trickle down to these people. I don't necessarily see how this affects the lives of women in the short term, but in the long term, how they're able to create sustainable change when legislative laws can be repealed like Roe v. Wade. What have I proven to you in my speech? Firstly, I've proven to you how we've already proven that these conservative areas are likely to be receptive to the feminist movement. Secondly, I've proven to you why the changes that we can create in these conservative areas are firstly much needed by women, but also secondly much better than the form of change that government can create in their best will. And for all those reasons, your ballot should go to opposition.
All right, thank you, Ms. Deputy Leader of Opposition. Moving on, I would like to call upon the government whip, Ms. Aida Safia, to continue proposing the motion on behalf of the government team. Please welcome.
Am I audible? Sorry. Am I audible? Okay. Give me 1 second. And also, before I start my rebuttals, I'd just like to reiterate how on our side, on-site government, our goal for today's debate is to prove how feminist goals or feminist organizations, right, feminist progress across the board can be achieved more immediately and more tangibly by engaging with progressive, educated, well-off women, right? But at the end of the day, both sides agree that our most vulnerable stakeholders are women who are needy, are women in marginalized communities. It's just that on-site government, we are going to prove to you, and we have proven how helping these marginalized communities can be done faster by leveraging the benefits that are brought by more well-off and educated women, right? So the first clash that both sides argued on is amplified visibility and advocacy. So two questions were raised by side opposition, right? They questioned how we have no proper mechanization for this. And they also asked who exactly are these translators of change, right? So I think that it's quite intuitive, right? Our responses are quite simple. One, it's quite intuitive how women who are more well off, they would have had a higher education. They would have been in a higher education institution for like 4 years, right? They would have peers. They would also have a job. So therefore, they would have peers in both their personal and professional lives, right? So intuitively, they have some level of influence. They would have a larger amount of people that they know. So they would have some level of influence towards their communities. And in their professional lives, they are more likely to have some sort of connection with decision makers, right? So why is this important? One, it makes feminist ideas more visible, right? Because every single women who believes in feminism, they would discuss this at some point in their personal lives with their families or online, right? It doesn't matter. What happens is you catalyze support, even if it's one person that is still support that you catalyze. So what about women with more influence, right? So how do we know that this translation from making ideas more visible catalyzes into support? How do we know that this is true? One, crisis support officers, social workers, policy researchers, and lobbyists in a lot of feminist organizations like Women's Aid Organization or Angkatan Wanita Malaysia, etc., right? These are all regular working class women who are part of direct action, right? And how did they come to know of these careers that they can take when they leave professional jobs like an engineer or stuff like that? It's because of how they were more perceptive and they learned about these causes, right? And not only are they part of direct action, but they're also more able to verbalize feminist messaging. They're able to verbalize it better. And what happens is when this messaging passes through these NGOs and government organizations, these are also the women and people who translate these things into languages like Tamil or Mandarin in order for these materials and content about more to raise awareness to be shared with marginalized communities, right? So that's working class women who are part of direct action. Let's talk about rich and well-off women. Who are part of indirect action, right? So a lot of think tanks, political think tanks and NGOs in Malaysia are funded by private equity firms, are funded by venture builders, right? For example, Kazana and all of that. And if you look at the board members or trustees of these organizations that fund feminist organizations, they're educated, well-off women. And why exactly are they doing this? One, they would create alliances with causes that they resonate with, and they're also morally obligated to do with CSR and stuff like that. So yeah, you might say that these women are opportunistic, they don't actually care about them, but they do still give money to these organizations, so the benefits still exist, right? So let me explain the trickle-down effect. So in 2015 and 2016, for example, when a lot of a lot of rape and assault on young girls occurred, right? So what happened was there was a need for a child sexual offences act, but there wasn't one at the time. So what happened was these feminist organizations, they engaged with rich women who are board members of the Star newspaper and stuff like that, right? They also engaged with schoolgirls, but not from poor communities. They engaged with schoolgirls from the cities, like in KL and in Georgetown and stuff like that. Why is it important? It's because these young girls who are English speaking, these women who are board members, they are more perceptive to idea, they can spread it further. And the trickle-down effect is that in 2017, the Sexual Offences Against Children's Act was enacted, but who benefited from it the most? It's young girls in rural areas and stuff like that who are more aware that, hey, if this is happening to me, it's actually bad and I should report it, right? So there is a trickle-down effect that occurs there. So on the count of amplified visibility and advocacy, we have thoroughly explained to you how there is a proper mechanization, there is a translation of change. No, thank you. Next, let's talk about perceptiveness and how perceptiveness is important and how it translates to change. One question that was brought up by side opposition was that they said that needy communities can be perceptive through tailoring to their conservative ideas, right? Two responses. One, what is the likelihood of that, of tailoring to conservative ideas? What is the likelihood of that meeting feminist goals more immediately if more resources and more time is needed to increase these women's literacy, legal literacy, gender literacy, it's going to take a longer time. It's going to take more resources in order to do that, right? Second, even if they buy into it in the beginning, right, there is a lower guarantee that they're able to commit to that cause. There's a lower guarantee of them being able to or want to commit to your program via engagement or policy evaluation or social work, simply because poorer people have other things to do. They have poverty, they have time poverty. However, people who are more educated, they have more resources, more time, and there's a higher guarantee of them committing to you and your program in order to meet a certain goal, right? I'll give a simple example, right? For example,
why?
no, thank you. There's an issue with maternal healthcare in rural Sarawak, right, where there are very little maternal healthcare providers there. So in order for them to get engaged with women there, it took 2 years for consultations and workshops in order to make sure they are literate enough to understand the issue. 2 years. However, when you look at causes in Kuala Lumpur, right, in Petaling Jaya, when you engage with women who are more educated, from conception of a program to its launch, it usually takes an average of only 3 quarters. And at the end of the day, the people who benefit from these projects are women who are our most vulnerable stakeholders, right? However, the harms inside opposition's world still occur where there's a waste of resources, there's further distrust when members of this community, they see that, hey, I have to opt out of this because I'm poor, I have other things to do. And then they see that the promise of change falters. So there's further distrust in vulnerable communities towards change, right? Now, so what have I told you today in my speech? One, when it comes to amplified visibility and advocacy, it is guaranteed on our side. There is a promise, a guarantee of immediate action that will trickle down to people who need it. And second, we've talked to you about how perceptiveness, people who are more perceptive are going to bring more immediate and more tangible change. And there's a high likelihood of them committing to a project until the end, as opposed to women from financially needy communities who, even if they buy into it, there's a higher guarantee of them opting out of it simply because they are not privileged enough to continue. And that's all for me. Thank you. It's like, I didn't touch this at all.
What's that?
On stakeholders.
We covered enough today, also. I mean, Aida, we're facing against
Aida?
multi-time.
It's unmuted. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you, Ms.
Tell me the
Government
defect
Whip.
in your case.
Moving on, I would like to invite the opposition whip, Mr. Kuhan, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Can you all hear me and see me? Perfect. Starting my speech in 3, in 3, 2, 1. I'm in the middle of in Perlis for my brother's graduation at UniMap, and the reason why my camera wasn't on was because I'm in a studio taking pictures while the debate was going on. But UKM make this very easy with their under-mechanized case and their lack of engagement in our case. I'll prove why. Let's go women in our case. I know what's the English going on, but let's go. 3 call-outs at the top of this speech. The first call-out I want to make is their lack of acknowledgement of what communities actually look like and the context of the debate as to whether or not the trickle-down can exist. No. Their frame was communities that are conservative can still get help. I'm going to destroy their case by proving how this is non-existent. Given their team did not set up who these feminist organizations are, our frame in Russian speech that this is likely done by Western feminists was clear for 3 reasons. First, they have the political and financial capacity. 2, Western feminists are patrons of feminism by being ambassador for global feminism. Third, this debate is about trade-off between communities, so obviously it has to be done in the volition of a feminist movement that's more established, that is definitely the Western feminists. Given that this debate is done by Western feminists, it has to be one that's global, which is why I'm going to question proposition. Tell me how your Roe versus Wade can affect abortion rights in Saudi Arabia, can affect abortion rights in Malaysia, can affect abortion rights in Thailand, for example. So it's contextually impossible to talk about why the trickle-down cannot take place if this context were to be global. But let's take the best version of the case. Let's say it's communities within a progressive country. I don't know, they didn't even say that, but let's say it is. Progressive communities already have achieved reforms on domestic abuse, provisions under Employment Act for gender wage gap. So there's less of a parity. And assuming this is transferable and this trickle down is transferable, I'm questioning them. why do conservative movements actually need this specific amount of change? Why do they need provisions and mandates about equal pay when they don't even go to schools? Why do they need legal provisions for quotas for women to enter C-suites when they have suffering with domestic abuse by their own spouses? So literally at this flaw, I'm proving, number one, their context doesn't even make any sense for a debate. But number two, their trickle down, even at its best, is not applicable to the nuances of suffering in the women in this context. Their case is dead. But second problem with team proposition, they never understood the core tenets of feminism. We were clear in our principal push that feminism wants to talk about intersectionality and vulnerability. Very simple as analysis. We're a small movement, finite resources, financially disadvantaged. We're getting pushback from conservative governments, which means we have to instrumentalize whatever we have that's limited to help the most vulnerable. Which is exactly why we said our mechanism of change is soup kitchens for poor women, domestic abuse shelters for women who are facing domestic abuse by their own spouses, educational facilities for women who don't even have access to get basic needs of education, apprenticeship opportunities for women who want to enter employment, who don't have any forms of jobs, and this is an easy pathway because they're entering through entrepreneurship. Their response was just that poor people won't do anything. And you know, the last speaker before me said they took 2 years to understand some English and Tamil literacy or whatever. First commentary here. Why are you choosing specific mechanisms to help conservative women under your world when we have the fiat to prove that we want soup kitchen, domestic abuse shelters? You don't need to learn English or Malay to get the help of getting domestic abuse shelters or education facilities or getting food on the table. These things don't require you to be literate. But secondly, this defeats your case. Notice how their mechanism is to have transferable trickle-down change from progressive communities to conservative communities. But the example they gave was, conservative communities don't understand English, took so long to translate. That's exactly your case, right? You want transferable change from progressive metrics of what change is, law reforms regarding to gender page gap and all that. If you say that's not applicable by your own analysis, I'm unclear why you can win this debate, because our mechanisms was giving direct aid and help to women that are most vulnerable. These facets already prove why the case is already dead. In case this is not enough, I'm going to tell you why we crystallized and won this debate in 2 clashes. The first clash, in which world do we protect different facets of feminism and its fight? I'm going to take the best case scenario. Let's say glass ceilings is important. Let's say making a lot of change is important in progressive societies. I'll explain why opposition dynamically deals with both. First, let's talk about progressive feminists. Progressive feminists already have more change and reforms in terms of breaking glass ceilings, like freeing the nipple movement, so much of sexual gratification in the way that they're campaigning. Secondly, they're more financial resources and political capacity. They're more established as a bloc. They have Western feminists with cult of personality that they're able to ride on. Therefore, the sheer of influence of spreading the message is significantly larger. And thirdly, they have progressive laws. US, UK, so much of progressive laws, so many new provisions. They have, what's the new thing? Fuck it, I forgot. But the point is, they're more progressive and they're much better at able and enacting change. That proves you need very little or aggressive intervention by feminist movements because it's self-sustainable almost. So even in our world, it's self-sustainable for the reason that it's already stepping stone for a lot of these changes. But you don't dynamically at all engage with women in conservative societies, which is where we hammer it home. We talked about why vulnerable women probably face very proximate, immediate concerns. Food on the table. Their response is you don't speak the language, but you don't need to speak the language for food. We talk about domestic abuse. We talk about rape and assault. We talk about pushbacks from their very conservative governments. We are able to approach them much better in our world because we not only give them aggressive intervention in areas that need the most help, the areas that don't need much help, there's already a self-sustaining cycle. So at this clash, we prove why we dynamically deal with both and meet the challenges of feminism globally. Second clash, which one has the greater capacity to enact change? I want to prove that just because you're a conservative group of women, even though the info slide, the motion says they are strict and fixated towards traditional gender roles, that doesn't mean they cannot change. Why? Often, they are within the shackles of oppression that brainwash them into thinking that these things are legitimate concern. These are cemented by culture, these are cemented by religion, these are cemented by superstition. Often it's a Hobson's choice. They are actively acknowledging that it's their choice, but they know what could be better, which is why they're fixated on this choice. We can change this at a point in which our analysis, that they have relatability, that they have culture and superstition in the way that we message it. We slowly use incremental steps to prove to feminists in these areas that you can change, and these are probably liberties that you are likely to have more. That's exactly why Rwanda, their significant Catholic population, they have a conservative populist party like the Rwandan patriotic front, but they still made significant changes of understanding that they need more women in seats in the Rwandan parliament. Look at India with caste-based discrimination, with the Hindu nationalist parties having a dogma of regressive feminist values, but they're still able to have Gulabi gang that is incrementally violent and having radical change. All these shows, just because you're stuck in a traditional cocoon doesn't mean there's any prospect of change. If you're able to logistically position our feminist fight in a way that convinces them that you can make small marginal change, is when we're much better, because we create change that's not only good for conservative movements, but it's in tandem of the self-sustaining cycle that we talked about. For those reasons, it's clear opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Opposition Whip, for your speech. To proceed with the next agenda, we will now continue our debate session for this round with the reply speech session. The reply speech shall be delivered first by the opposition team. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Catherine to deliver her speech and conclude their debate. Please welcome.
Okay, can I be heard clearly? All right. Let me set up my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two broad issues I'll cover in my reply speech. The first, which side are women better off? And the second, which side can the feminist movement create the most amount of change? First, some meta commentary on government. I think this team is not really engaging with a lot of the arguments that we created, especially on the principal obligation of what the feminist movement should prioritize in terms of how these women are more vulnerable in conservative areas rather than women in more privileged progressive areas. And secondly, in terms of like POIs, they really just didn't take any. There's less engagement there. On the first issue, which side are women better off? The first thing that I want to address under this issue is prima facie, which type of women need the most amount of help. I just think we want this very clearly from the principal argumentation, which is why I keep bringing it up. And this alone should win this issue, because we've proven why vulnerable women in rural areas, no matter if they are ugly or stupid or illiterate or just not English speakers, they deserve the most amount of help. And we should prioritize our allocation of resources towards those areas, because these are the women that face the most amount of domestic abuse, discrimination, and an inability to exercise their rights as people. Second part of this issue, how is each side in this debate making women better off? I think there are three broad pushes from a government on this. The first is on women voicing out, second on legislative change, the third is on trickle-down change. Let's talk about all three of their pushes. The first, on women voicing out. I really don't know how this is likely to be effective, because I think these areas are still dominated by like political interests or economic interests that are more likely to be persuasive to these people as compared to a privileged woman talking about their issues that they face. I don't know why this is persuasive to a large majority of people. But secondly as well, it really seems like these women in these areas can do this on their own without the help of feminist movements by flipping the own characterization that government has provided in this debate. They are rich, they are educated, they have political capital. It really seems like they can fend for themselves. They don't really need the feminist movement to aid them in this area. I'd argue that the feminist movement is maximizing their resources in a much more efficient way when they go through our change. But secondly, in terms of legislative change, I think we've tackled this a lot in terms of the high amount of costs and capital that it requires to affect any legislative change. And the example that they use that works against them in terms of abortion rights is a clear example of how legislative change is not the be-all end-all. Third push from them on trickle-down change. I think this mechanism came out really late in government whip, so this really shouldn't be credited to the fullest extent, but I'll engage regardless. I think their impacting really highlights the issue that we want to address on our side. We don't necessarily require commitment to programs or literacy, because we are aiding them in doing this. We don't require these women to be able to speak English and Mandarin and Tamil to be able to access our shelter for women or soup kitchens. We just allow for them to be able to access the most direct forms of aid that they require to live a life that is not one of subsistence. I think their side is the one that requires high commitment and high literacy. So firstly, it seems like it's only limited to the top 10% of women that are already rich and can already fend for themselves to begin with. But this is secondly, it requires the feminist movement to expend a high amount of resources to be able to deal with this. How do we make women better off on our side? Firstly, in terms of direct aid. Secondly, in terms of providing a countervailing force against the strong patriarchal narratives that exist on this side. Thirdly, in terms of creating a safe space. And fourthly, in terms of just being more representative and listening to the issues of actual women who are suffering in status quo. Three mechanisms to weigh this argument. Firstly, on vulnerability, we protect the most vulnerable people. Secondly, in scale, because through maximizing our resources, we're able to create the most amount of change. Their side has a high ceiling of change, which requires more resources and more capital that is literally just burnt for almost nothing. And thirdly, our change is more sustainable. Second issue then, which side can the feminist movement create the most amount of change? The best case on government requires a high ceiling for change, which requires a high cost to do things. So there's like prima facie, just less things that you can do. I think all the argumentations of social diversity, etc., is really just not addressing the core issue of this debate, which is on which side can the feminist movement create the most amount of change. We've proven to you specifically why these movements are able to help the most direct sufferings that women face and allow for them to achieve some form of a life with dignity. For all these reasons, you should only vote for opposition.
Thank you to the representative from the opposition team for the reply speech. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Ibrahim from the government team to proceed with the reply speech and conclude your debate. Please welcome.
Hi, again, before I start, I'd like to confirm that I'm both audible and visible. All right. Okay. Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, let's analyze what has actually been said in today's debate and what are the key clashes that have come up. So, ladies and gentlemen, both sides today talked about change. Both sides today talked about the kind of change which they want to do. Side opposition pivots to you a couple of things. Firstly, they tell you that on our side, the change would be more ambiguous because on their side, they're just coming out and giving like direct aid and so on and so forth with little, where it's like the equivalent of like teaching, like giving someone a fish. On our side, we're trying to teach them how to fish and like how to sustain themselves. How so? We do the way side opposition pivots it is as if on our side there will be no change. However, as the motion even says, that it's the prioritizing, because these things already happen in status quo. We already have aid coming to them. We have direct aid coming to them. Funds and resources are already funneled to them. Those benefits all still exist on side government. However, we are trying to make a bigger impact on change. That is the reason why we push for this level of people to come in, because the same people that side opposition is claiming to like just simply protect by keeping them in this bubble, by like not really like helping them push out and like get better change. As Ida already pointed to you in her speech, that there's already been big change, and these big changes that really protect these minority people, even though that like they were at the center of the push, that they got the biggest structural change at the end of the day, is simply because that we have these people who, one, of better standing, two, that have a better understanding of the situation, and three, like had the connections and the ability to get these things pushed forward in the first place. It was only achievable on our side of the house. On their side, they also further push that on their side they can just simply help the poor people, and then that these poor people will continuously buy in. Ladies and gentlemen, on their side they are pushing for the continuous push for just like handing out aid instead of like helping them get out of a better place. So the question I would like to ponder right now is that would you rather help these people by just continuously giving them food and like they just like continue and the cycle just like continues, or at the end of the day, would you rather have like bigger structural change? Because the only way and the fastest way to achieve structural change and the fastest way to make sure that this trickle-down effect can work and there's a plausibility of it working, as has been proven by side government's case, is by prioritizing these more well-off people. Because side opposition have been putting up this straw man saying that we push like extreme radical feminist ideals. However, we've already clarified this early on that our ideals, when we pivot these ideas out, when we try and push for these things, these are inclusive of the struggles, of the unique intersectional struggles which these women, these minority women have already suffered. So their concerns are already being brought forward. So here's the thing. On their side of the house, no one is bringing these voices out to the masses. They are just bringing aid. They're bringing band-aids. We're trying to stop them from like bleeding out in the first place. That's the push coming from side government, which side opposition never touches on. They never touch on the fact that how on our side, like we get one bigger immediate effects when it comes to like structurally changing out And two, they're talking about like changes that already exist in status quo, that will continue to exist in status quo. Because we already mentioned that they would still be catered to. However, we are trying to prioritize this because we want to take down the biggest structural problems that already exist in community. And that is the issue that we are trying to bring down. Side opposition never really engages with this, and they push on the ideals that directly handing out aid is the only way we can cater to these people. As we've stated throughout our case, is that these people are not neglected on our side. We're just trying to make the bigger change for them. We're trying to push for this change so that they can structurally get better, they can structurally grow, so that these issues of like domestic abuse or like women getting paid less or like like maternal health and all these kind of things in like rural areas, we want these things for these people in these communities, and it's only achievable on our side. With all that being said, I'm out.
All right, thank you to the representative from the government team for the reply speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now reaching the end of our session today. Congratulations and thank you to all debaters from both teams for a wonderful and informative speech. So, Wesley, would you like to
Yeah.
have some time before provide your verdict?
Yeah. Just
All
give me
right.
like a few minutes. Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Can you all hear me?
Loud and
Yeah,
clear.
we can hear you.
Okay. Is Op here? Is Gav here? Both are here.
Up here.
Gav here, Op here. Okay, let's go on, and then I can go take my nap. Okay. I gave the win to opposition, and here are some reasons why. Um, let's first talk briefly about what we get from Gav, what we get from Op. What Gav wants to do is that when what they want to do is pretty much you prioritize the rich women, you focus on them because rich women are educated, they are well connected, they have a prominent voice, and they have political capital, which means that you can get laws passed and you can get change that benefit conservative women as well. Op basically tells us that you can spread the message that is palatable to them and their values. You can give aid that is like direct and it benefits them, and this is good because it's urgent. And there are a few questions, right? So the first question is, will legislative change occur? And basically, the Gulf contention here is that because these women are already progressive, um, when you focus on them, they'll fight for these things when they're in power and all, and also because their connection, they have their job, and there's a better political capital. I think what we do get from Gulf is, unfortunately, we don't get a serious response to the opposition contention that often, even if you do get a woman in parliament, you get a woman in power, like often these women have other considerations, right? Like your political and economic considerations, and also they're more proximate to them. Even if there are um, sort of feminist ideals that help women, it's often the ideals that are more proximate to rich women. And also because if the numbers of these women are low, then there's not much we can do anyway. And I think um, what this also shows is that even if there is legislative change, um, there Gov also does not really show me why it will be change that is lasting, given that Op also contends that there is likely to be pushback from a conservative government in these conservative areas and that laws can be reversed. No real material from Gov that really counters that. So what this means to me is that even if there is legislative change, if any, it looks like these women, even if they're in power, they'll fight for whatever causes that are proximate to them, which means it's unlikely to benefit people on the ground. And when you compare this to the direct aid that comes from Op, then I'm likely to believe that this direct aid in the form of like education, in the form of jobs, in the form of like training, stuff like that, shelters are more likely to be beneficial, immediately beneficial to these women in these conservative areas. Yeah. So lastly, even they're not, I mean, lastly, in the terms of the changes, right? Even in the best case that Gov gets the legislative change and it is the kind that is good, I think in light of the material about urgency that comes from LO, I think the timeline in which you get these benefits is important. And I think um, in terms of the timeline, what I do get from opposition shows that direct aid is shown to be faster than legislative change, given that there is a whole process that needs to happen. Even in the best case, that you do get you do get these changes passed, right? In terms of like the discussion, the lobbying, the enforcement, and all that. No real response to this coming from a government. So yeah, the next area that I look at is and this I suppose the strongest response to opposition that comes from government, which is that why will conservative women buy into a movement that panders to conservative women in conservative areas, right? And I suppose this is where we look at um suppose there's two contending contentions and sort of mechanisms here, right? So on Gov, it's like if you get success and these women are successful, then this success will trickle down, and when there is this trickle down, then uh, the conservative women will somehow follow suit. And what we do get from opposition is the idea that yes, when you do operate in these conservative places, you can sort of tailor your message to fit their religious values and their conservative values. You don't have to just go full out uh, the liberal version of feminism. So you still can get some level of acceptance here. And I think in terms of the Gulf contention that if you are successful, then they'll sort of follow. I think in light of the op contention that the privileged women will fight for proximate things and advocate for progressive values, I'm not really sure why conservative women will follow. And I think the ops mechanism that you can sort of tailor your message to them, that this sort of tailored brand of feminism is also legitimate. It's also gaining legitimacy in the intersectionality and stuff like that. Means that I think OpMec is like likely to happen. They will at some level buy into the movement, even if they're conservative. But I think ultimately and more importantly is that I think much of ops impacts in terms of the direct aid that they're pushing are not really contingent upon the conservative women buying in, right? Because like it's like they just need to like receive aid, go take part in the education, go get shelter, whatever. Like you don't have to really believe in feminism in order to benefit from the services that the feminist movement provides. So at the end of the day, I think like even if I'm wrong that they will not buy in, I still think it still benefits the women, which both sides sort of don't dispute are the most vulnerable in the debate. So this leads to Gulf Whip's push about conservative women being, what do you say, less literate and less committed compared to privileged women. Um, I think this is a response that I think, first of all, is a little bit late. Lah. I mean, the previous two speakers don't really talk about this at all, right? Um, so, and so I think secondly and more importantly is that the the whole literacy and commitment thing is only important in as far as it is relevant to the type of program that you're running. And insofar as the type of program that you're running is like direct aid, then it's okay if they're not literate and it's okay if they're not committed. So yeah, that's how I saw the debate. Yeah, lastly, and this is sort of the sort of material that comes out from both like replies, which is that so on Gov reply, there's this idea that it's about prioritizing, right? So there is already direct aid. Thus you need thus you can get bigger impact by prioritizing this legislative change. Whereas like from op, we get this idea that yeah, it's about prioritizing. So like even if you don't sort of like even if you do not uh cater to the progressive and privileged feminists, they'll be fine. Like they're self-sustaining, is what they call it. Therefore you need to push more aid to the ones that are more in need. And so I think the real comparative here is like it's diminishing returns, right? And I think more aid does more aid in these communities, even if it does exist already, I think it does more change as compared to giving more focus to white feminism, given that both somewhat exist. So I think yeah, it's an up-win. Okay, do you guys have any questions?
All right. Thank you to the judge for your verdict and feedback. We hope that all debaters will take note of the comments given to yourself to improve yourself in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the photography session. Therefore, to all adjudicated and debaters, please kindly turn on your camera. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right, then. So thank you so much for your cooperation and for your time spent here in this debate round. I will now proceed with the interview session with any representative from the opposition team. Therefore, I would like to ask any representative from the opposition team to stay in this meeting room. In the meantime, other debaters and all educators, you may dismiss your role. Thank you.
Is it okay if we ask for? Oh, yeah, he's gone. Never mind.
Thanks, UKM.
Congrats, UM. You all were amazing as usual.
Kat, Catherine,
Hey, Rashun, you do it, please. Thank you.
Kat, you do the interview, Kat.
Hey, I have no makeup on. I cannot.
Okay, I'll do it.
All right. So Rashmi, right? All right. Wait, yeah.
Oh, it's not that good.
All right. So hi, good evening. My name is Taki Fatihani, and I'll be your interviewer for today. Can you briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. My name is Rashwin Pillai. I'm from University of Malaya.
All right. Shall we move on to the first question?
Yeah.
Alright. Okay, so the first one, from your point of view, what do you think about the motion for this round?
I think the motion was actually very well balanced to begin with. So both teams had sufficient arguments to present. I think secondly, the motion that they pose also has a real life effect where if you notice this is something that is being contended in the real world. Where should the feminist movement particularly focus on their movements, trying to make changes, on which party should they give more support? So overall I think it's a very good motion to debate on.
All right, so second question, are there any challenges that you face while debating in a virtual environment?
Definitely yes. Number one, the interaction with our teammates itself. So since we are quite far apart, oftentimes there's clashing voices being talked to discuss our arguments. Secondly, then I think the technical part itself, moving into our breakout rooms. At certain point, it's hard to follow when the motion is released, when the draws are out. So we need to look into our WhatsApp group. So I think physically you won't have this problem. It's clear cut. Everyone is gathered in the same convening hall. It's much more better. Thirdly, then presentation wise itself, you really don't get into that debate charisma to begin with in virtual debate. So I think the atmosphere in a physical round is much more heated and eventually brings out better performance from debaters.
All right, so the third question, do you have an opinion on the Royals 2023?
I feel so far it was well run. There wasn't any big hiccup noticeable that affect the rounds, and I'm glad to be part of Royals 2023.
Okay, so the last one, can you describe Royals 2023 using 3 words?
Okay, fantastic, amazing, phenomenal.
Okay, excellent. That's the end of our interview session. Thank you and congratulations once again for winning today's debate. I wish you all the best for your next round.
All right,
You may
thank you
now
very
leave.
much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye
Good
bye.
luck.